Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another of my videos. Now, a lot of people probably have seen this because it came out yesterday, and by the time this video goes out you're probably all aware of it, but of course I've got a few comments to make on the topic. As you saw by the thumbnail, farmers have had their subsidies cut, but let's just find out what that really means. Let's go to one of the national press here, the Daily Express, which is online. Subsidies paused without warning in Labour's latest shattering blow, it says, to UK farmers. Now, interesting. You get into the meat and to veg of the bits and pieces. It says farming subsidies have been halted without warning in the Labour government's latest shattering blow to farmers and rural communities. Post-Brexit payments to farmers were paused. This is yesterday, on Tuesday, the March 11th, when the government announced plans to revise the Sustainable Farming Incentive after June's spending review. Of course, if that's not another kick in the teeth for the farmers, I don't know what is. And the National Farmers Union President Tom Bradshaw said this is another shattering blow to English farms, delivered yet again with no warning, no understanding of the industry, and a complete lack of compassion or care. And then it goes on with various things. On MSN News, it's a similar thing, although it's slightly different. It says here, farming subsidies halted in latest Labour attack on rural life. And there's a picture of Tom Bradshaw. But it says here, farming subsidies have been halted by the government in a fresh blow, etc. The main replacement to the EU-era subsidy scheme was paused to new applications without warning on Tuesday. So I'm a bit confused whether it's all subsidies to farmers or just those applying for subsidies, leaving, it says here, some farmers with holes in their budgets. The government said sustainable farming incentives would be revised after the spending review in June. So we've got April, May, June, and then however long it takes them to do that, with a cap on how much money the farmers could receive. So that's the sort of news, and I dare say there are other news articles out there all about it. Now, I want to put a spin on this that perhaps a lot of people are not thinking about. They'll be thinking how terrible for farmers not to have those subsidies and how dreadful it is that the government would just whip the carpet from underneath their feet without warning, which I agree is totally unacceptable. However, I want to take you back to the 1930s, and a farmer in Wiltshire called A.G. Street, who was also a commentator, wrote books and appeared on the BBC. And that doesn't necessarily, because he appeared on the BBC, make him a bad person, of course, but he was commentating back then in the 1930s. And in one of his books, which I have on my shelf, he talks about two axioms that farmers for the farming industry that should be there. And he says, and I have spoken about this before, but I wanted to share this because it seems to be quite relevant. His first axiom was that the land should come first in everything. The land, we are custodians of this earth. We don't own it. We should look after it. We need to protect it. Yes, we can farm it and we can get food from it, but we must make the land our most important thing that we protect and look after for future generations, so that we do our farming, we don't blight it, we don't fill it with crap, we don't poison it, and we don't cause irreparable damage to it, which I think is very sensible. His second axiom was that farmers should not have subsidies, or that if farmers have subsidies, all industry should have subsidies. He was worried at this point in the 1930s, when they were coming in, these subsidies, that it would make farming the poor industry, the charitable industry, the industry that needed handouts. And he believed at the time that farmers should and ought to be able to, with the help of the government, with the help of the public, to stand on their own 2 feet, because they were doing something far more important than, say, the car industry, who were getting a lot of attention and expanding and, a new thing, because they were making food. We could do without cars, but we cannot do without food. And of course, once you start, and this is where it seems to me he was absolutely right, because once you start and it did start sort of in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. The sort of bad guys getting in touch and changing the way that we farm with monoculture, with larger fields, ripping out the hedges, with instead of having mixed farms with animals and doing things with fertility farming in the old-fashioned way, we changed to artificial fertilizers. We started to poison the landscape. We blighted and got rid of, it seems, by these processes of artificial insecticides and so on, the wildlife, and particularly the pollinators, which is so important. And of course, we damaged and have been damaging for the last 80 odd years the soil. And now we can't grow anything unless we put chemicals on first. And as it seems that we can tell now, we're trying to get rid of the farmers themselves in any which way that is possible, by taxing them to the hilt, and of course making their life really bad by telling them not to grow food. And now we're not going to give you the subsidies anyway, which they've become so reliant and dependent on. And as these farms have grown larger and larger and having to compete and growing stuff for processing farms, if you like, or processing plants, interesting they're called plants, isn't it, and supplying the supermarket with effectively nutrient-free, vitamin-deficient food in colourful boxes that's instantly heatable in a microwave and is of no value whatsoever to our bodies, rather than what was a beautiful thing to eat and drink. And we spoke about raw milk yesterday and the nonsense of this sort of pretend milk, or milk-like, as Julia pointed out to me yesterday. She says they describe these things as milk-like, which tells you it's not milk if it has to be described as milk-like. So why would you have something that's like food that isn't food? So these subsidies, I think this does give people, if we look at this in a different way, and of course it's a blow to the farmers if they're dependent on payments and they've been suckered in, basically. They can now look at the government, as I'm sure they are beginning to realise, they are not your friend. And anybody who dishes out a drug, whether that be a narcotic or money for free, and makes you dependent on it, you become reliant. It seems that it's not a good idea to be reliant on somebody who can change their mind on a whim and make you dependent on it. This is why, and I know Mark Byford, the bowler-hatted farmer, is going around the country now doing this, where we're forking the system, as he calls it. We're advising farmers to change their tactics, to grow real food, proper food, and sell them as far as you can direct to the public. The public out there, the men and women, the people of this land, are desperate for real quality food. And if farmers started to say, I'm going to turn my back on the government, I'm going to get out of that jurisdiction. I'll have a video later on today which will explain how to get out of that jurisdiction and why farmers, unfortunately, are stuck in the jurisdiction where they're under the behest of the government, but they could turn and get out of that system if they want. We don't have to see farmers putting the gun to their heads and committing suicide. We don't have to see farmers selling off their land. We don't have to see farmers selling out to big conglomerates and having solar panels or wind farms all over their land. We don't have to see them having to sell under the cost of production to supermarkets. Farmers actually are in a very strong position if only they realised it and got themselves together, not to protest, not to beg from the government, but actually to step away from that jurisdiction. And I know it sounds very difficult, and perhaps it's very unusual for them to think in these terms because they've been grown up in what seems like a traditional way since the 1930s. But until that time, farmers were not under the subsidies. They were local to the towns and villages. The farmers were smaller. They provided food and services to a local area, not to these great world trade markets, which have made them having to compete against other countries. We need our farmers to grow seasonally and locally, organically and healthily in the proper way. And I think the more that the government throws at the farmers, the more the farmers are likely to wake up to the fact you don't need the government to hand you stuff which they can then take away with the other hand. So let's put a positive spin on this. Let's say, okay, that's your role. The mask is off. We know how dreadful you are. Thank you very much, but I'm not dealing with you. There are wonderful people of this land who would love to deal directly with the farmers. And farmers, these people on the land would like to help and come onto the land and assist you to grow new healthy vegetables instead of the commodities that you're doing, to look after the animals, to help you create an amazing farm and experience for everyone. There are people out there. Do not think you are isolated and that you cannot do this. You are surrounded by kind-hearted, loving people who love the land, who love this country and want to see it back where it once was. Thank you so much for watching. Links in the description, and do check out the video a bit later on, which is talking about an oath. But I think you'll find that the way to step away from the jurisdiction of the government is absolutely vital at this time.